intelligence or CTI, incident response, data protection, GRC, and technology laws, spread across critical infrastructure, BFSI, e-commerce, AI, and healthcare tech sectors. So he has worked on a wide variety of subdomains within the ever-evolving domain of cybersecurity, and his work experience also spans several sectors. Jason Joseph is a recognized expert on most of these topics and has won quite a few awards in cybersecurity technology and strategy, including the prestigious India Netherlands Cybersecurity School Challenge Series 2 times in a row. Apart from this, he also has interests in geopolitics and national security domains. Academically, he received his BTech from the National Institute of Technology in Calicut or Kozhikode, and he has completed advanced programs from the Indian Institute of Technology, Kanpur, the Asian School of Cyber Laws, the World Intellectual Property Organization, and is currently pursuing his postgraduate diploma in cyber law and cyber forensics from the National Law School of India University. In addition to this, he holds a number of premier cybersecurity certifications and is an active contributing member of many professional organizations in the cyber technology and management domain. Jason currently engages in solving complex problems that lie at the intersection of technology, data protection and governance, cyber security, and law. So, the topic for today's webinar is System Security Part 1. And in this webinar, Mr. Jason Joseph will touch upon the following aspects of system security, namely Windows security, Linux security, Mac security, Android security, iOS security, Windows access controls, enforcing security policy, Linux security enhancements and infrastructure, and log files. With a couple of add-on topics. The add-on topics are Endpoint Security Management or ESM, which cover the scenarios of MDM versus MAM, BYOD versus CYOD versus COPE versus COBO, ADA LDAP, NGFW versus traditional firewalls versus UEM, traditional AV versus NGAV versus EPP versus EDR versus XDR, and virtual private networks. And the second add-on topic that you would be covering are security best practices for endpoints, such as laptops and mobile phones. We are planning to conduct the next webinar on the topic, which will be System Security Part 2 by Mr. Vijay Nagaraj from Secure Code Warrior on Thursday, 19th January 2023. We will announce the schedule and open registrations for the same shortly. Please watch the CySecK website for more updates in this regard. Jason, I hope your audio and video is robust, and I think you can share your PPT, please. Okay. CySecK control room, can you please unmute Jason and make him a co-host? I request all users to please use as much as possible their actual names when they join the session. Please do not use the name of your college or institution. Instead, use your full name, and do not use any nicknames like yes, no, etc.
Okay. So good evening, everyone. So I hope everybody can hear me.
Yeah, Jason, I think you can just be a little loud. You can come a
Okay.
little closer to your mic if it's fine.
Okay.
Yeah.
So once again, good evening, everyone. And as Abhishek had mentioned, I'll be taking certain aspects of system security. So diving deep into the topics. So the objective which I'll be covering, and the basic topics for today will be like, okay, what is system security? And what are the common threats that you will be protecting a system against? What are we exactly trying to protect in terms of, when we say we are protecting a system? And then we'll have a high level focus on the operating systems, the security features, and the basic hardening for Windows, Linux, macOS. And also there is I've done a comparative study on from Kaspersky on the mobile operating systems comparison from a security standpoint. Then of course we'll be looking at the types of devices and the security aspects and the processes, the tools, and the antivirus from a comparisons perspective. And also I'll be signing off with what you should do from a very basic perspective for cyber security practices from an endpoint aspect. Now, going forward, what is system security? When we talk about system security, it is basically we are talking about the security of any ICT system, the information and communication technologies. And also, specifically, we'll be focusing on a very important part of it today, that is the security of the operating system, which is the core of the ICT. Now, what are we protecting? Essentially, we are protecting the confidentiality, integrity, and availability. It's called the InfoSec triad. Now, this is something like the holy grail of cyber security. Basically, whatever you are trying to protect will fall around these domains. So when I'm talking about confidentiality, it is protection from unauthorized access. And use and going further, protecting the data on the systems. The integrity is the accuracy, the non-tamperability of that system, and also the availability also ensures that the system is available for its intended use during the intended time period. Now, if you look at the threats, mainly you will be able, which affect an operating system, you will be looking, you can look at it from two aspects. One is the program threats. You have your viruses, your Trojan horses, your backdoors, your logic worms, bombs, and your worms. And again, the system threats also, the worms come into the picture because they eat up your system resources, the denial of service, and of course, port scanning also has recently come into the picture because certain mandates that is coming under an incident. Now, let us go forward to our first operating system, Windows. Now, when we look at Windows, we are basically we look at it from an operating system security perspective. Now, these are the capabilities that Windows have, which are enabled by default or will require minimum, integration or enabling to actually get it started. Now, when we talk, let's go to the first one, the secure boot and the trusted boot. Trusted boot actually helps prevent malware, corrupted files, etc., from loading when a Windows device is starting. So this is the initial part of the boot up protection. The cryptography and certificate management, and again the encryption and data protection falls around the lines so that it uses code, it uses keys you basically put to ensure that the data that you have on the system is secure and is accessible by only the right persons during the right times. Then, of course, the Windows has by default built-in application security checks. In these insights, they help you identify issues and take action to make sure you're protected. Then BitLocker again is the prime go-to file. I mean, everybody knows BitLocker. It's a data protection feature that integrates with the operating system and addresses the threats of data theft or exposure from loot, etc. Again, the security baseline is again a Microsoft recommended configuration setting that explains the security impact. The VPNs again are your P2P or private public network connections that you use so that your connections are basically secure and nobody's able to sniff it. Then again, you have your Windows Defender firewalls, other aspects of that, and of course your antivirus, malware protection, and your exploit protection again comes from the security aspects. Which all of these things essentially are integrated into one tight operating system. Then again, this is a slightly new concept which is gaining precedence. That is your attack surface reduction, attack surface management, and the rules behind it. So basically, these are built into your Windows, both on the endpoint and on the server side, to block certain behaviors that are often used to compromise your network. So basically, it reduces the attack surface to a minimum area wherein you can have mitigating controls. And again, your anti-tampering protection again and your network protection also falls in the same domain. And again, one very important thing with respect to all systems, all approaches to security is controlled file system access, which we will be diving to deeper into in a short while. Now, yes. So basically, when we talk about account systems in Windows, we basically uh, talk about uh, one particular, I mean, two types of accounts. The first account type of account which comes into our the picture is the workgroup accounts. Now, these are the default settings in Windows. This is what comes when you purchase a Windows system. It's suitable for home, small businesses on the same LAN, and the user is able to make changes to the local group policy. Now, what a group policy is something which I will be coming to, and no computers in the work group has control over any computer. They share a peer-to-peer network. I mean, the relationship. And every computer in the work group can have multiple accounts associated with it and can log only into the work group it belongs to. And very importantly to note, this is a low level of protection, and therefore password protection is not something which is there by default. Then, Then, if moving on to the next version, this is the Windows domain accounts. Now, this is one which is most tightly controlled of all of the Windows 10 and even further accounts. Now, these are controlled by servers, which are known as DCs, domain controllers. Now, network admins use domain controllers to manage, the security and permissions using an Active Directory system. Now, Active Directory, this concept of Active Directory is hosted on on a local server, and then the network admin uses the Active Directory file system, Active Directory domain service to actually manage permissions within all of that domain account. Now, and computer mandatorily needs to be joined to that domain to be accessed by the access anything inside that domain. And this is thus default standard for all most corporate networks. Now, and another feature which is a differential with the earlier workgroup accounts is that only limited changes can be made by the normal domain account user. The bigger important changes need to be made by the administrator of the AD. Now, coming back to what is an AD? AD is basically a directory service. Okay, so basically, it is something which authenticates and authorizes all users in a Windows domain network, assigning security policies, permissions, etc., etc. The certificate services, Active Directory Federation services, all of those kind of things. Now, AD, as I said before, it is controlled using a server which is called the domain controller, and there is a protocol behind it which is called LDAP, Lightweight Directory Access Protocol, and along with it, it also uses Microsoft version of Kerberos and DNS to augment its system. Now, AD, along with the group policy, allows you to centralize the management of computers on the on your network. Now, imagine that you have thousands of computers. Now we cannot go to each individual computer, and right now we are in a remote working scenario as well. So we cannot go to every computer, wherever they are, could be in any part of the world. So we can't be able to do deploy the uniform policies. It will take too much time. It will be too much of effort. So this is something which is quite central to managing security management. Now, AD is controlled by something which is called an ADUC. It's an Active Directory user and computer, simply put. The AD permissions are a set of rules as to how much an object has an authority to view and modify other objects. Now, there are two types of permissions which come into the picture with regard to this. They are, the standard permissions. Though you have the full control read write permissions, and then you have the special permissions which include the modification privileges. I've just pasted a picture here. This is what an ADAC looks like. The person who might be taking part two will be actually going in and giving you demos on this. Then we will have the group policy object types. Now, in a group policy, there are three types of group policies. Now, the local GPOs are the ones which will apply only to the local computers. The non-local GPOs are the ones in which the policy settings have to apply to a larger set of Windows computers and users, and then the starter GPOs. So are mostly into the looking at the server editions. Now, what exactly is a group policy and group policy object? Now, in an AD environment, the group policy basically put is an easy way to configure computer user settings that are part of the domain. And you can apply it across platforms and at any level. If you apply it at a level, it automatically affects all the levels below it, unless, of course, you instruct it not to do so. Now, these are some of the examples. Now, just to make clear, you can look at drive mappings. You can map or remove drives you using login scripts. I'll just give you a brief on how the login scripts can be written. And of course, the folder redirection. This is very important from an endpoint backup monitoring perspective. And the Internet Explorer settings. You have more than 2,000 settings that you can configure through this. The local accounts and passwords, you can set the the policy, the all sorts of policies with regard to access using passwords. And of course the printers. This is very important because SMB ports, etc., are quite vulnerable from if it is not configured the right way. Again, when I'm talking of group policy objects, it follows something which is called an LS DOU order, local site domain organization unit, OU. So the policy on the local computer first gets processed, then, as I said, down trickles down and the site from the site level to the domain to the OU. And the primary rule, which is followed with respect to a GPO, is that they are nested within the OUs to the root and then outwards from there. And just to avoid conflicts in case multiple things are enforced, is that the last applied policy will take precedence in effect. Now, this you administer the GPOs using something which is called a GPMC. This is what a GPMC will look like. Now, moving on to the second, one of the major aspects of Windows security, it is the network file system and the shared folder permissions. Again, all of these things are enforceable from a AD perspective. Now, with regard to the NTFS file permissions, it manages access basically to files and for folders stored on the network file system. The permissions, needless to say, has to be carefully implemented. The attributes, you can see the attributes on the side. Basically, these are the attributes that you usually play with. And this can be mapped to a user or a particular group and so on and so forth, mapped to the objects. Now, how do you basically enforce these things at every level? Now, this is using something which is called the registry keys. Now, what the registry key is basically an organizational unit in the Windows registry. Now, it is the internal database, basically the which you use to store the computer used to store the configuration information and the permission options. And basically, there are three groups. The root user machine concept is what we look at when we are grouping registry permissions. If you go to in your work group accounts and all, if you go to CMD, you type your run and you type regedit, you will get the registry editor, and you can just basically have a look at that. Now, how do you write scripts? So basically, you might have understood that, okay, for one or two computers, it is okay, it is quite fine to actually go down this route. But how do I manage a lot of things on a day-to-day basis? Now, that is where PowerShell comes in as a very handy tool. It's basically the shell. Basically, you have your program which takes your commands to the code. Now, people here who have some coding experience will know about your CLI, etc., etc. Now, the Windows PowerShell basically is a task automation tool to help administrators to reduce their workload. And needless to say, it performs all operations, automating tasks, network administration, taking commands and executing all of the above. And one more tool also in this regard, which I'd like to highlight with respect to Windows security administration, is the security configuration and analysis. It's a standalone snapping tool that users can use to import saved configurations, and it gives you a comparison of your state to state as well. Now, in addition to this, the Microsoft actually looks at has a quite a suite of products as far as the security aspect goes. Now, if you look at it, you've got things ranging from the IAM module onwards, right from your SIM XDR to your risk management and your GRC aspects. Now, this is the entire gamut of products that they offer, and almost as and how the case applies, it will be applicable to both endpoints as well as server versions. Moving on to the next operating system that is we should be looking at is Linux. Now, Linux security, we essentially it was designed keeping security in mind. Now, security by design, it is something like, you can look at the analogy of a factory fitted let's say feature in a car would be much smoother, much more integrated than something which is an afterthought. Now, Linux security has that distinct advantage. And of course, the code is open source. Now, this is something which is a huge advantage, because essentially the rest of the operating systems have the tendency, are actually looking at security through obscurity. Essentially, the code is hidden, the logic is hidden, all of those things are hidden. You need to reverse engineer it in some cases. But by and large, that security by obscurity hampers open source scrutiny, and that in some respects is something which where Linux has an advantage. And of course, the user privilege models, etc. Now, unlike Windows, where by default everybody is an admin, that's the term that we use, Linux greatly restricts root access through a strict user privilege model. um, the super user owns all the privileges, and only ordinary users are granted enough permission. The principle of least privilege is followed there by default to accomplish common tasks. Now, since Linux users have automatic, low access rights, and they require additional permission to open attachment, access files, or invoke the kernel, etc., etc. It becomes by default harder to spread malware and rootkits on a, Linux system. Now, on top of that, the Linux kernel boasts of an array of built-in security defenses, including packet filters in the kernel, the UEFI secure boot, and mandatory access control, which was which is implemented, which is something which Linux looked at right from the default design onwards to the security-oriented versions, and of course security to diversity. Now, if you look at the Microsoft suite of offerings, Windows, you will find that it is like a homogeneous monoculture, wherein you have a default, setting of largely default baseline of Windows, etc., etc. Now, if you look at Linux, you have Linux distro for literally everything under the sun. Your, security researchers here. I'm a VFPT guy myself, so Kali is something which we will, or is something which we look at from the offset perspective. Similarly, we have, SC Linux, AppArmor, and all of those kind of things which come in as LSMs, and even Linux distros are there. Secure Linux distros are there for specific purposes. Then, of course, the vast level of customizability, configurability actually gives a person who is quite knowledgeable about security to actually fiddle with the system and tailor the security requirements to his advantage. Now, let us quickly go through a few aspects of what makes up the core of the Linux security system and essential hardening aspects. Now, one of the key aspects here is the LUKS. So, Linux unified key setup is basically a disk encryption, which is specific to Linux. It's arbitrary, therefore, any device, it is device agnostic. Any device can be encrypted, and is platform independent as well. So the compatibility and interoperability ensures that you can implement the password management in a much more secure and documented manner, more uniform as well. Now, delving deeper, if you look at we highlighted the Linux user accounts as one of the highlights. So there are basically three types of user accounts: your root, your regular, and your service, where the root is the super user. And all of these things are linked to a UID, and that doesn't change. That is static. So it serves the purpose of tracking quite well. And there are basically three levels, very basically put. There's a read, write, execute, and the main types of users will be your user group, your other, and basically you have that setting for everyone. You have an ACL to administer all of these things, of course, and then a list of all users. If you are a root user, you'll be able to access, this etc in the etc password file, and also the groups are maintained there as well. And of course, these are two commands wherein you can see, the right side, this is how the, details with respect to a file will look like. If you go to any Linux directory and you type ls minus l dash l, you will actually get the file permissions in this manner. And also to change any permissions, you have to use the chmod. Now, the next aspect which I will be looking into is the pluggable authentication modules of the PAN, a common authentication scheme, but which can be used for a variety of applications. So this basically separates that standard and specialized tasks. Now, high impact programs such as login, your SSHD or FTPD, might want a higher level of authentication to actually ensure that you are, as in identity parlance, we say that a user is who you say they are. So that actually is something which is enabled to a much greater extent. This adds an extra layer there. Now, going on, there's a few hardening aspects. Now, ASLR is something which I want to highlight. Now, that this is something which is called the address space layout randomization. Now, basically, this follows the principle of security by obscurity. Basically, what this does is it randomizes the memory address space, making it extremely difficult to launch a memory corruption attack. Buffer overflow attacks are something which was very common when we were, writing earlier versions of C code, etc., etc. Now, this effectively, sort of minimizes that attack surface to a great extent. Then again, let us go to one another hardening aspect, which is the LSN. Basically, is the kernel module security. Now, the objective of the LSN was to solve the problems of access control, and how they did it was to, ensure that the security extensions were plugged into the kernel to give that added layer of security, and thereby allow the admins more control of the system to ensure the access control. Now, I've made a comparative study on two of the most common Linux security modules, which is SE Linux and AppArmor. Now, if you look at access controls, basically AppArmor grants access first, then applies the restrictions. SE Linux just does almost exactly the opposite, restricts access by default and grants access only with proper authentication. Then the availability, of course, both are definitely available for most those things, but you will commonly find AppArmor in SUSE and Ubuntu, and SE Linux only on Red Hat and Fedora. The difficulty level to master and administer this is more complex as far as the C Linux goes, and the independent verification is possible only in AppArmor. The policy rules again, you have a higher degree of customizability. Basically, AppArmor is very, very less customizable. So, and therefore, the level of control also is medium, and on the other side, it is quite high. Now, moving on, we'll look at the communication aspect to it, and that is where the secure shell or SSH comes into the picture. Basically, it is a network protocol that enables the secure communication. Now, how do we ensure hardening on the communication aspect? It is through basic checklist. Now, I've listed down a few of the basic things that people normally do to ensure SSH hardening. Now, disable the empty passwords. default SSH port should be rerouted. Root login through this, definitely not. Now, SSH protocol 1 had a lot of vulnerabilities. It came default with a lot of the earlier Linux systems, and this was highly recommended that it was moved. Then idle timeout gives them more window, so they define the timeouts based on the business case. And as always, the principle of least privilege and the zero trust. Allow only selected users for a specific time towards that, and also disable the X11 forwarding. Again, there are two major, set of guidelines when it comes to Linux OS security hardening at a higher level. One is the Open SCAP project. So it is an open source ecosystem. It's a you will have multiple tools to actually enforce the security guidelines. So right from a baseline compliance content, and for a scan and a GUI for scanning, you have something for the databases as well. Now I've listed down, I've given the link for this, and you can download and start using it. And also the CIS hardening guidelines are something. CIS is the Center for Internet Security. It is basically a benchmarking organization, and they also have their own version of how to harden the Linux system. Now moving on to the third operating system, which is Mac. Uh, macOS security basically, it shares a lot of some amount of commonality by having the Unix based to it. Now, other on top of that, basically, it has most of these features enabled by default or with very little effort required. The file vault basically is 128-bit encrypted. Now, if you use the Apple Time Machine also along with 5 volts, the backups also become encrypted. The virtual memory, now this is very important from a forensics perspective, or from a malware perspective as well. The virtual memory is encrypted. The thrash is, the secure deletion is something which is there by almost default. You have gatekeeper keychains. Now, on the application side, you have a host of things, right from the communication of the aspect to the ensuring that it is it is not an infected file through the signing, sandboxing, and the quarantining approach. The macOS security, is primarily goes a notch higher by looking at privacy by design, and also you also have the option for firmware passwords. You have in the others as well, but it's more tricky. The Apple ID also you have the two-factor authentication. You have the remote tracking and wiping on the system itself. The packet filter monitoring is also there. Mac is enabled by default. Now, going forward from the desktop, laptop devices to the mobile operating systems, basically you will get to hear about four types of operating systems as far as the mobile OS goes. I thought instead of given the paucity of time to actually just have a quick comparison. Now this was something which was done by Kaspersky. Now, if you look at Android, it is the configurability is quite high, uh, but that also comes with an Achilles heel, which means that fresh out of the box, you will not be getting that same level of security as far as iOS goes. So this is the Android security tinkering around with it is best if you are actually somebody who knows how to sort of adjust the settings to suit your activities. Now, as far as iOS is considered, everybody knows it is highly secure, etc., etc. Now, but again, this is not invulnerable to malware. It is heavily dependent on Apple's proprietary security practices, and of course the premium on price, the additional premium on price that you have to shell out for an iOS system is something which is a moot point. Then again, two other players which have come in the scenario is the BlackBerry and the Windows operating system. Now, BlackBerry is something which is touted to provide industrial grade security, and the support issues with respect to this is a problem. So again, if you have, it is not just a quality issue. There could be a security issue as well if the support is not that very high, considering the speed of the updates, etc., etc. Now, as far as Windows is concerned, this is something which is steadily improving as far as the security domain is concerned. Again, support here is an issue. Now, we have talked in general about the operating system, but what about the devices which we come along with it? Now, it is pretty much useless if you do not secure the devices also which come along with it. Now, when you look at devices in a corporate environment broadly, your devices will come under one of these things. Now, your basically BYOD means bring your own device. You use your own laptops, mobiles in a corporate environment. CYOD is you can choose the device. Now, your COPE is basically your company-owned, personally enabled laptop, which you see in organizations with medium level of security. Your company-owned business only is basically your business laptops, which have a higher degree of enforcement, and of course your the COSU is something which you use only for a specific purpose. Now, the level of security actually goes this way. I mean, your COSU has the highest level of security and your BYOD has the least. So that is how the trajectory goes as far as the security angle of these devices are concerned. Now, I've given an example for all of these devices. Now, one more security control which comes into the picture with respect to endpoints, operating systems, and its related communication aspects is your antivirus. Now, though an antivirus is highly recommended, there will be use cases, and of course there will be a cost attached to it as well. Now, how do you actually look at it? And also, the way the antivirus trends are going, the way the vulnerabilities are coming in, the next generation antivirus takes a lot of precedence. Now, as far as the traditional antivirus is concerned, it looks at everything from a signature-based perspective. Now, it has a massive database of signatures. Now, whenever a program comes into the scope, it references the signatures. It looks as to whether the signatures match, and then accordingly, the software is allowed to run or not allowed to run. Now, there are two very big problems with respect to this. A, if you have not updated your antivirus. Second, in case of a zero-day exploit for a particular software or service which is running on your system. And again, this one endpoint detection and response capabilities are very limited. And by and large, your traditional AVs don't have the capacity to roll back to a previously good state. Now, that is where the NGAV, the next generation antivirus, comes into the picture. It looks, of course, it references the signatures as well, but also it looks at patterns and it learns from those patterns. And these patterns are, by and large, AI enabled. And there are, and hence, considering this feature, these are much better at 0 days detection, and the dependence on signature base, if you have not updated it and all that, automatically goes down, because there is it looks at the patterns, the behavioral aspects, etc., etc. And there is a high degree of enabling as far as the EDR and even the XDR capabilities are concerned. It can talk to your SIM, it can talk to your SOAR networks and sort of action in a much faster, better manner, and contain the cyber attacks, vulnerabilities, or whatever your threats might be. And of course, almost all of them can roll back to a good state provided you define well. Moving on, this is a comparison between three types of antivirus. You have your basic antivirus, then you have your endpoint detection and response, and now we have a concept which is called the extended detection and response. Now, as far as your antivirus and EDR are concerned, basically they look at only your endpoint ecosystem, your Windows, Linux, Mac devices, and your mobile operating systems in certain cases. Your XDR goes forward, integrates, has an integrated approach with both your endpoints as well as your clouds, your servers, etc., etc., and it can talk to your security incident even and event management aspects, and your SOAR or automated response systems as well. Now, coming back to endpoint management, now that we have looked at all the tech pieces, let us look at some of the tools and the processes that are associated with the tools. You have a concept called MDM, mobile device management, to manage the corporate devices. You have application management to manage the applications on top of it. You have the email management to enforce security and policies for corporate email on mobile devices. And basically you have a clubbed version of this called the EMM, which is basically your MDM and your MAM. And you have a further integrated approach which has come up, which is called unified endpoint management. So basically it's your EMM plus all of your other endpoint devices under IT's oversight. Now, in the information management basically looks at the data security aspect, and your IM basically looks at your access control. Now, we've come almost to the closure of our webinar. Now, I'd like to sign off with some of the very basic security practices for endpoints and systems. First off, nothing beats cybersecurity hygiene. Follow all those systemic practices. Have a clear desk, clean screen policy. You use you exercise your due diligence. While looking at links, phishing links, all of those kind of things. And of course, your antivirus suite again is very important. All of whatever be the endpoint device, whether it is for professional or personal use, an antivirus suite is completely recommended. And as far as access control is concerned, there are two principles which those are basically logical principles. There is tech involved, of course, at a later stage, but basically the principle of least privilege means that you give the least amount of access, and zero trust basically means that you do not trust, deny by default. So that is basically what I would suggest for endpoints in systems. And with that, I'll sign off. Thank you. And I'll, over to Abhishek for questions, answers, etc.
Thank you, Jason, for extensively touching upon the different aspects of system security. I'm sure that all the introductory points that you have given would have aroused the curiosity of our viewers, and they would definitely like to explore more. And it also sets the stage for the follow-up webinar, which would be a deep dive into Linux security and Windows security. Um, so, yeah, so those who are interested in contacting Jason, he has put up his LinkedIn link right there on the slide. And you can also contact CySecK at the COE website, https://cs-coe.iisc.ac.in. So we will now take questions from the participants. If there are any questions, please type them in the chat box. So Jason, let's wait a minute or two to see the questions that pop up in the chat box.
Sure.
I request the participants to please type in their questions in the chat box. Yeah, Jason, we have a few questions now.
Yes, Abhishek.
Yeah, so the first question is, how can we keep antiviruses updated with new malwares in the cyberspace?
Right. So it is basically something like it's from a process perspective. Um, First off, what I would highly recommend is that don't go for a multi-year the this one a subscription with antiviruses, because the detectability of the top antiviruses keep changing year on year. Now look at things from a year-on-year perspective as far as antiviruses go. That's point one. The second point is that when you are looking at the specifically the updation aspects, ensure that you actually have scheduled an updation every day and your system is connected. That these two things by and large will be is sufficient to ensure that your signature databases are comprehensive enough to look at the emerging cyber threats. Now, if the question is from a more from a personal, from a professional device perspective, I would highly recommend going for an EDR, if not an XDR solution, because your traditional antiviruses do have limitations as far as response to malware in your environment is concerned. If it is your personal antiviruses, that full internet security should take care of most threats. Thank you.
Okay, that is very useful. Thank you so much. And the people would usually tend to think of themselves as safer if they bought a multi-year subscription, thinking that they would be safe over a span of time. But it's good that you have conceptually clarified that. So the
Right.
next question is from slightly career perspective. Someone's asked that with little knowledge and basic concepts, would they be able to, how would they be able to secure a career in cybersecurity, or would it be required for the person to improve the skills and start in network troubleshooting?
Uh, See, as far as cybersecurity is concerned, now this is a field wherein you have to constantly stay updated, irrespective of the domain, whether it is networks, whether it is web, or wherever at some point in time, if you are looking at GRC or management, you have to be. And this is a very highly technical thing. So always the skills that you pick up on cyber is whichever domain of cyber, whether it is network troubleshooting, whether it is operating systems, basically even on the cyber operations, or on the offensive security side. The skills which you pick up have to be constantly updated, refined, and troubleshooted. Now, coming to network security, yes, now that is something of a balancing act, because yeah, there is opportunity as far as data centers and other aspects are concerned, but by and large the shift is more towards the cloud. So the importance in a corporate environment, except for certain critical industries, has shifted more towards the cloud networks perspective. Now, by and large, the concept of networks, and cloud networks, though it remains the same, there are certain differences in how you look at cloud networks, because from a security perspective, because there is a shared responsibility model that comes into it. But having said that, if there is somebody who wants to specialize in a network perspective, please dig deep, keep going deeper, ask yourself questions as to the why, the how the things are working. Try to look at it from a hacker's perspective very importantly, and that is where you will start understanding how exactly to plug the gaps. Thank
Okay,
you.
so the next question is about a couple of Linux commands. Can you please explain about the SE Linux command and the APA armor?
So basically, the SC Linux, these are both AppArmor and SC Linux are basically something which you call and LSM, the Linux Security Module. Now, both of these are essentially invoked through the kernel. Now, the mostly the commands for all of these things will be taken in the subsequent class. I think there will be a deep dive on this as well. So, if he is looking for any specific commands as such to invoke enable, I'll be happy to help out. Is there a follow-up question to that?
No, there isn't a follow-up question. If there is, I'll let you know.
Right. So I
Okay,
think
I said,
I'll just quickly answer that also. It's basically, your normal sudo apt get, Linux Armor should actually sort of do the trick in most cases. There will be dependencies on certain packages, etc., etc. But that's how you basically, get yeah, the module in the first place. The configurations and all come out as a later part of it.
okay. So yeah, if there's any other question about that, I'll let you know. Okay, so there's one interesting question. Does Mac require any antivirus?
Definitely. I mean, see, at the end of the day, it is an operating system. Okay. And it is not invulnerable to malware. So, if people, here who have watched the Hindi movie, Baby, in which there is a fictional hacker who says that digital hai to hackable hai, which essentially means that it is just, function of your time, the effort, and the expertise of whoever is behind, or the program which actually manages to crack. So nothing is invulnerable. It is basically risk mitigation. So so how do you mitigate risk? By putting in as many controls as possible to ensure that a malware doesn't come into your domain, or you don't have a network breach, etc., etc. Now that there, your antiviruses are very important. So short answer, yes, definitely Mac or has all the problems that you would find with this thing, only to a lesser extent. And of course, highlighting ransomware and adware, your this one, your worms like cryptocurrency miners and all of those things. These things definitely have are written for Mac because of the higher level of hardware in this one capacity that they have, especially in case of crypto miners. So you do need to have antiviruses on Mac.
Okay, so the next question about another operating system. What are the key security issues in Linux?
See, as far as Linux is concerned, there are two or three issues from a very high level. One, the first thing which I will put across is the, let's say, now, since it is open source, it is a double-edged sword. Now, on one hand, it is, you can look, people look at it from a scrutiny aspect, etc., etc., and all of those things. But on the other aspect, the obscurity is completely not there. Everybody knows how the code works. Everybody knows how the workflow is, etc., etc. And therefore, there is, the chances of a zero-day attack or something on a Linux is actually something which is of quite amount of concern. Now, that is one security issue. And also, given the level of customizability and settings, it doesn't come with a default level of very high. It does, but in case it is not somebody who really knows how to play with the system and ensure security according to his use. Now, you will have the situation wherein malware families will run, riot on Linux. Now, these are the two main things that I would like to highlight with respect to security issues in Linux. And again, at the end of the day, if you don't have, the updated versions of your Linux and all the packages and libraries that come associated with it, the depending on the use case, the chances of you getting, having some sort of vulnerability will definitely increase.
Okay, so a couple of very interesting questions coming up, and this is from the research perspective. All the previous questions were from either the personal or professional use perspective. I'm a researcher to develop an antivirus which is resistant to obfuscated malwares. Can you please provide some research directions?
See, with respect to, obfuscated malware and all, see, there are, vectors to manipulate files through or the operating systems through interrupt vectors that gets changed. Now, this was more in the early years, but now the changing vectors, the hooks and all are in dynamic DLLs and all that. The whole aspect of that is getting changed. And second, there are binaries that have done that in high-level language approach to C, etc., etc. And yeah, even from a steganography perspective as well, even things which are hidden in PDF, PostScript, etc., can be used for that. Now, looking at things from, even when you say from an obscurity perspective, it is not just your, even if you are delving deep and looking at documentation, etc., steganography is an area wherein things have not been sufficiently solved to that extent. So that is something you might want to look at it specifically if the question is on obscurity.
Okay. So this is another interesting question at the interface of technology use and policy. You have answered the questions regarding the issues of personal security risk mitigation, but we have to consider the technology gap among the masses who are going digital. So what is your basic suggestion to deal with them?
See, it is undeniable at the end of the day. I mean, this again, double-edged sword, that we are going digital, society is moving digital. There is something which is called the digital divide, unfortunately. That is something wherein, if you look at people in the older generation and all, they are increasingly left on the other side of the digital divide, and people who are too young as well to understand tech and the risk associated with it. Now, both sides actually fall on the other side of the digital divide, and unfortunately, these are the people who get scammed more for obvious reasons. Now, how do we actually overcome that? Is, nothing beats awareness. Uh, Please educate, please tell people, people not to, click on phishing links, not to download spurious versions of software, etc., etc. Your basic cyber security hygiene, around 80-90%, I would say, of your attacks would be mitigated through that, through these two approaches: basic cybersecurity hygiene and a heightened level of awareness. And also, it is important, I mean, this is a very delicate balance to not be panicky on that aspect and not go the other way so as not to use tech. It's always a balance between, your convenience versus security. It's ongoing debate. Let's hope it is solved one day.
Sure, that is quite an open debate, and I'm sure, well, let's hope that we can get close to solving that. But I have a follow-up to that, in that if you're talking about people on the other side of the digital divide, let's say, due to certain inevitabilities, they have to use digital payments and fintech.
Yes.
Now, what would you suggest to make them more aware of a particular link, or of the possibility of a particular link being phished or replicated, fraudulently? How would
Okay.
you suggest that they could be made more aware?
See, phishing links, unfortunately, there is no, viable solution from a, from a personal perspective. So the obvious route to take here is, again, two things. One is, or to be aware. Now, the awareness could come in the form of, the younger people in the family and all, telling the older generation or the younger generation to, just pay attention to bank advisories, pay attention to especially, advisories and stuff. Never share your OTP and other things with others. Now, as far as digital payments go, I would, considering we all have our Paytms and our Google Pays and all of those things, and it has become an indispensable part of life. The QR code actually also increases the risk. There's sometimes a possibility that the QR code might invoke an RAT and a Trojan and a keylogger, which might then be used to further attacks, especially on the financial aspect side. Now, a lot of though a lot of the threats with regard to that have been mitigated, the problem still remains, because basically you cannot process, in that split second, you cannot process and find out whether the QR code is a malicious one and all of those kind of things. So the other way to look at it is, you should obviously have a mobile antivirus with, but then what you can do is also to layer your bank accounts. As far as people are concerned now, would have only disposable cash in your accounts linked to your wallet, and which the ones which you normally use on your mobile phones, etc., etc., and have a separate system of looking at your high value accounts, etc., etc. And second, in case of an incident, you should immediately inform the bank and the relevant law enforcement authorities for speedy redressal and recovery. So these are the few things that I'd like to suggest there.
So I'd like to thank you for that, you technological hack as well as a practical hack. So, okay, speaking of hacking, there was already a question on Linux, but someone asked, is Linux unhackable?
No, not at all. I mean, see, it's your phishing link. I would just go back to your phishing link and say, if somebody clicks on a phishing link, that's it. I can download an RAT and a Trojan if the user permission is sufficiently high. Even if not, and I get a foot in the door, there is something which is called privilege escalation. So basically, you can escalate privileges. You can, if it is connected to a network, you can laterally move as well. So there is no such thing once again as not being hackable. It is just a question of how difficult it is. And if by and large, malware and ransomware are two things which majorly affect Linux systems, especially ransomware, because that is most corporate networks, especially which are the tech companies, etc., etc., have their developer environments, and hence the access to data, etc., etc., through Linux systems. So this is a big cause of concern.
Okay, so there's another interesting question. We, if you have an antivirus that is installed, then is it possible that it's the antivirus app is causing the computer to become slow because of its high RAM usage? And is it also possible that the antivirus is deleting some files which could lead to some other applications installed on the computer not working properly?
Repeat that question. I didn't quite get it.
Yeah, okay. So assuming that you have an antivirus installed,
Right.
so the first question is it possible that this is the culprit in making the computer slow because of its high usage of RAM? And the second
Uh,
question is this software deleting some critical files of other apps which are causing them not to work properly?
See, again, antiviruses at the end of the day, they are, considered as, they look at either signature or behavioral based patterns. Now, based on that, they triage software, they look at software from that perspective, and they flag certain software. Now, running the antivirus running, and certain antivirus are certainly not lightweight. So the question is, yes, it will slow down, and especially if your RAM is not of that high, capacity. Now, also, depending on your settings in the antivirus, some of your system files and or your application files could be considered as malwares, and it's basically a function of the signatures, the your threat databases, which is part of it. So, short answer, yes, it is a possibility. Both sides, both deletion of files as well as your system slowing down.
Okay, so that's an interesting thing which we learned that antivirus software itself are not holier than thou. So one participant had his hand up. I just requested him to type his question in the chat. Yeah, so there are questions about the assessment and the feedback. I will post the link to the assessment shortly. The assessment link will be valid for 1 hour, that is 60 minutes only. And upon completion of the assessment, after you submit it, please remember that one user is allowed to submit it only once. You will get a feedback link, a feedback form, which has about 4 to 5 questions that are both qualitative and quantitative in nature. We would also like to understand how we can improve our webinar content and quality and direction. So please ensure that you give your feedback. Yeah, so Jason, I think that's that. So we'd like to thank you for putting together this extremely interesting webinar and touching upon various aspects of system security. So as I had said before, you have set the tone for the webinar System Security Part 2, which would be a deep dive into Linux and Windows security. So would you like to share anything else?
No, what I would say is, build on this, go forward, go deeper. And if, any of you have further follow-up questions, we are all here to, we are happy to answer, give back to the community, and even learn in the process. I mean, no one in this is a vast field. Nobody knows everything, So your questions might even teach us a thing or two, or force us to do some research on some things we have not thought of. So please keep asking those questions. It was a good time sharing my insights. Thank you, CySecK, also for the opportunity.
Yeah, so we at CySecK would we are very excited about this webinar, and we look forward to having you come back to give us some more webinars on more interesting topics. And I couldn't personally agree more with you when you say that this is an ever expanding domain. Every other day there's a new subdomain that pops up. There are new sets of skills and new sets of certifications. So one can only learn by sharing their knowledge with others, and you can only learn more by answering all the questions that the participants ask, and they can also learn more from you. So thank you, Jason. I will now move on to the assessment part. So I
Yep.
request you to please sign off. Yeah, so ladies and gentlemen, it is now time for the assessment, and it is also time for me to make another announcement. The announcement is that the placement portal, or what we call the internship portal, on the CySecK website has just been launched. So we are still in the process of onboarding users. I will first put the link to this portal on the web page. So we request you to please register on this portal. Once we reach a critical mass, we can see some more activity happening on this portal. The one point contact for this portal is our assistant manager, Mr. Kaushik GN. Kaushik is on leave today, and I'm not sure if he has joined the webinar. I'm not sure if he's been able to join the webinar from the location that he is currently in. Mr. Kaushik GN is the SPOC for this internship portal, and you can write to him in case of any issues. I am just putting in his mail address. So any grievances or any issues you face while registering or using this portal, please drop a mail to Mr. Kaushik and he will assist you with the process. We are also in the process of welcoming new organizations or startups or companies interested in hiring cybersecurity interns to register on this portal so that they can start the process of putting up their job openings or internship openings. And then the process of recruitment can take place, and ultimately they can select suitable candidates for their openings. So it is now time for the assessment. So as I mentioned before, this assessment is being organized via Google Forms. So essentially, you would require a Google ID to log in and to complete the assessment. The assessment is 15 multiple choice questions, with each question having 4 options out of which only one will be correct. So I would request the CySecK control room to please keep the assessment open until 5:45 p.m., that is 17:45 hours. Yeah, so we hope that you'll be able to access the assessment. Someone is telling me that they're not able to take it. I don't know what the problem is. I just checked, and please ensure that you've signed into your Gmail and then click the link. We hope that you're able to access the assessment. In case someone is connected through an institutional network, are you connected through some access filter or firewall?